Hey, Psych students, welcome to Chapter 2, The Brain and Behavior. So you will see in this chapter that we only have two links. We've got the study hall, Getting to Know Your Brain, and the OG crash course, The Chemical Mind. So again, click on these for some really great information, basically just kind of highlights, what the brain and behavior is. So this is a very heavily termed chapter because it's all about the brain, all of the chemical makeup in your body, everything that's biological. So you may wonder, well, what does this have to do with psychology? Well, the simple answer is that anything biological is simultaneously psychological, meaning that everything goes hand in hand. Everything that's in the brain gets sent to the rest of the body. So it's a really cool chapter. And if you're interested in more of understanding the brain and all the neurotransmitters and everything like that, you might want to take an entire semester on development or the brain and behavior. It might not be called that, but it ties into neuropsychology. So if you're really interested in that type of field, then it would be a great idea to take a semester just in this course alone. All right, so the things we're going to go over, and again, I'm going to skip through some of this stuff or I'm just going to highlight it. So we're going to learn about the nervous system, neurons, brain structures and functions, endocrine system, brain damage, plasticity and repair, and then ending with genetics and behavior. All right, so when we look at the nervous system, we are going to look at its complexity, how it integrates, the adaptability of the nervous system, and then, of course, the electrochemical transmission. So, complexity. Our nervous system, our brain, is a very complex organ. There are so many nerve cells, billions, as you can see. This allows you to do everything to sing, to dance, to write, talk, achieve, learn, um, argue, laugh, you name it. Whatever you do in life, it's all tied to your nerve cells in your brain. And then we have to integrate all of that. So that means we're pulling all of this information together from sounds we hear to the sight we see to touch to taste and smell. So for example, when someone takes your hand, right? How does your brain know that? Because the first thing that registers is your brain. Your brain sends the signal to let it know that someone is touching your hand or grabbing your hand or holding your hand. So it's through all of these interconnected nerve cells. And we just seem to do these things just organically. All right, then we move into adaptability. So we are ever changing. We have neurons and just all things going on in our brain, and things are changing rapidly every day, all of the time. So through plasticity, we have the capacity to literally change through all experiences in our lives without even knowing it. It's just happening like a computer in the background, which moves us to that next one, electrochemical transmission. So like a computer powered by electrical impulses and chemical messengers that travel and communicate through the brain, this is how we organically communicate. All right. So here's where it's going to start getting it can get a little bit wordy and boring. So I'm just going to try to jump through it really quickly. All right, so in our nervous system, we have several pathways in our body. We've got afferent and efferent pathways. So which type connects to the skin, which type connects with muscle. So your afferent, that's the pathway carrying information towards the brain or specific organ. And then efferent is the pathway carrying information away from that point. So afferent is to and efferent is away from. So you can look at it as afferent is arriving while efferent is exiting. All right. Now we're going to get into the divisions of the nervous system. All right, we've got the central nervous system, or the CNS. That is your brain and spinal cord. Then you've got your peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. And within that, you've got what's called the somatic nervous system. And in that houses your sensory nerves and your motor nerves. Then you have your autonomic nervous system, and in that houses the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So within the somatic, that's where you've got your muscular activity and your internal organs. And then the autonomic nervous system, you've got the sympathetic nervous system that it arouses, and the parasympathetic that calms. And we'll see a picture of that as well. So if you look at it here, the central nervous system, you see everything that is located there. You've got your spinal cord, your hindbrain, everything that's in the hindbrain, the midbrain, what's in there, the forebrain, what falls under there. So as you can see, you've got your kind of what I call umbrellas, right? The hindbrain is the umbrella, the major thing. And within that, you've got the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla, and then so forth. The peripheral nervous system, that houses your somatic and your autonomic nervous system. So this gives you a good picture of what is going on within your body. All right, now we talk about all kinds of different stuff that can be a little boring for most, very interesting for some. All right, so we look at glial cells that provide support and nutrition. Your neurons, there's about 100 billion neurons in your brain, and that's where you're going to have your information processing. Like I said, often like a computer, where it's going to be communicating and commuting. We've got mirror neurons. Those are primarily in primates, and that what those do, imitation, social perception. And now we're going to look at the structure. So this is, just a very interesting picture. So this is the cell body, and within the cell body is kind of like the core, and then branching off of that core are these dendrites, and those are those branchy like looking systems. Then you've got your axon that goes from here to here, and then you'll see within right here this worm looking structure. This is your myelin sheath, and this carries impulses, as you can see. All right, so within to explain your neural impulse, you have your negatively plus positively charged ions, and then you can see here polarization, imbalance in charges. So again, I am not going to, I don't want to say bore you with details of this, but again, if you are really into this, you can take an entire semester in this. Some instructors and professors choose to kind of skip this chapter, and some cover it heavily. So what I like to do is just have that little balance in the middle, because this is kind of not my forte, if you will. Do I need to understand it as a clinician? Absolutely. But does it mean that this is what I'm interested in? No, not so much. All right, so I'm going to skip through these things. Again, it's not something you really need to know for this particular class. But again, you're interested in it, please take a semester on it. But I did like to set it up so that you can at least take a look and see how our brain communicates with the rest of our body. All right, what I am going to cover are neurotransmitters. And the reason I'm going to cover this is because a lot of people have heard of these neurotransmitters, and it's really good to explain, especially on a mental health standpoint, what these neurotransmitters do. All right, so they carry information across the synaptic gap to the next neuron. So the first neurotransmitter I'm going to cover is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine, that's the neurotransmitter that is responsible for your muscle actions, learning, and memory. And if you want to look into the black widow venom, I thought I had a link for that. Maybe I don't. I'm not sure. But anyways, That is the rise in ACH, acetylcholine levels, whereas lower levels of acetylcholine is linked to Alzheimer's disease. GABA is the next neurotransmitter that refines precision by inhibiting firing. So people that have low levels of GABA have anxiety, have higher levels of anxiety. Next one we're going to cover is glutamate. That's an excitatory neurotransmitter, and that is responsible for learning and memory. And what you're going to notice with a lot of these neurotransmitters, that's many of them are interconnected. So some neurotransmitters are also going to link to learning and memory. So it's just kind of, they all kind of work together. Glutamate is also involved in many psychological disorders. Norepinephrine, that's linked to stress and mania if you have high levels of norepinephrine. If you have low levels of norepinephrine, that is linked to depression. This regulates your sleep states in conjunction with acetylcholine. So like I said before, a lot of these neurotransmitters work together. So norepinephrine is responsible for helping regulate your sleep cycles in addition and in conjunction with acetylcholine. Dopamine, that's one a lot of people hear about, dopamine and serotonin. So dopamine is responsible for all of your voluntary movement. It's responsible for reward anticipation. You see that burger and you're like, oh my God, this sounds so good. That is your dopamine going crazy, going kind of crazy. Also, stimulant drugs, they activate dopamine receptors. So when you take certain stimulant drugs, it does activate your dopamine. People that have low levels of dopamine, that is linked with Parkinson's disease, while people that have high levels of dopamine, that is linked with schizophrenia. All right, serotonin. Serotonin is what that's responsible for, that neurotransmitter, is regulation of sleep, mood, attention, and learning. If you have low levels of serotonin, that is linked with depression. And there is a medication, it is the oldest medication to treat depression, Prozac, that increases those serotonin levels that make it so that that depression is much lowered. Endorphins, that's another neurotransmitter. Those are considered your natural opiates, naturally occurring within your body. Those mediate feelings of pleasure and pain. All right, so each neurotransmitter has specific pathways. So this is going to start going in little different directions. So the first example, serotonin, go ahead and just take a look at well, no, never mind. This shows, sorry, this one is not my active one, but this just shows you all of the pathways that serotonin goes in. When we look at oxytocin, that is both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. That is related to onset of lactation in new mothers. It's also related to that attachment and emotional bonds. Like when you hug someone or when you look at someone and you smile, your body naturally releases that oxytocin. It's also responsible for or has a role in responding to stress. All right, I wanted to put this in there. I thought this was a very good picture to 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 what was the word I was looking for? Totally forgot the word. To something. Anyways, that's my brain having a little misfire. Anyways, oh, perfect time for extra credit. You can let me know that in this slide, when I was going over neurotransmitters, the neurotransmitter slide, that I had a electrical brain faux pas, if you will. So I had a little mishap. So there's first extra credit. Word it however you want. All right. So this is just it's a nice picture that goes over serotonin, the endorphins, dopamine, glutamate, all of the neurotransmitters and their effects and how drugs affect it. So drugs can interfere with neurotransmitters. They're called agonist, initiates physiological response, or mimics or increases neurotransmitter effects. And then you have your antagonists. Those bind to the receptors to prevent a response. So that blocks the effect of the neurotransmitters. All right, when we look at neural networks, this just gives you a good picture of all of the interconnected pathways. These are some ways to study the brain. You can study the brain through EEGs. Those are electroencephalographs that record electrical kind of impulses in your brain. Another way is through, let me go back. Another way is through brain imaging. So I'm going to go over different brain imaging techniques. So the first one is our x-rays. So this is kind of what an x-ray looks like. The next one I'm going to go over. Oh, no, I just went backwards. Boy, my brain is having some electrical issues right now. All right, the next one is CAT scan, and this is what a CAT scan looks like, or CT scan, if you will. The next one is a PET scan or a PET scan. This one is a lot more expensive because now it's active, it's radioactive, so it kind of highlights the areas more clearly to see what is wrong. So usually when an x-ray or a CAT scan doesn't work out, they will often use a PET scan to see an even deeper image of the brain. Then we have an MRI, or a magnetic resonance imaging. As you can see here, that's less invasive. And then an fMRI looks at, the F stands for functional. So that's looking at blood flow in the brain. So that is demonstrated by the red in the brain picture. Okay, moving on to the embryonic nervous system. So now we're going to talk about the forebrain. The forebrain, of course, is at the front. You've got the forebrain, the midbrain, the hindbrain, which is in the back, and then, of course, your spinal cord. And this is what the forebrain looks like. That is what the midbrain looks like, or the area, the hindbrain. Now moving there. I love how I've got this kind of moving over for you. There's your brain stem. This is where underneath that your medulla is, or medulla oblongata. This controls your breathing and regulates your reflexes. If your medulla is damaged, that could possibly lead to coma or death. The pons, located right there, that little yellow, that is responsible for sleep and arousal. Your cerebellum is located right there. That is for motor coordination and social thinking and behavior. Your reticular formation, that is the stereotyped behavior patterns like walking. So your midbrain, under your midbrain, you've got your reticular formation, and that is responsible for things like walking. All right, looking at the limbic system, that is a whole other system. The limbic system is responsible for memory and emotion. And in that limbic system, you've got what's called the amygdala. And those are two little almond-shaped pieces. And that is looking at like fear, anger, things like that. That's what it's responsible for. So it discriminates objects that are needed for survival. And of course, we'll go over that more later. That is your emotional awareness and expression. So again, if you're fearful of something, if you need to run, or if you're angry, that is your amygdala working. Your hippocampus looks like a seahorse, and that is responsible for your long-term declarative memories. So when you go to sleep at night, your memories are being consolidated through the hippocampus. The thalamus right there in the very center, that is the relay station for much sensory information. Your basal ganglia is located right there, and that is for coordination of your voluntary movements. Then you've got your hypothalamus. That is responsible for your eating, drinking, and sexual behaviors. That also regulates your body's internal state. So if you have a fever or anything like that, the brain is sending those signals and you're able to know that your hypothalamus is working. It's also responsible for emotion, stress, and reward. And then this is just kind of evolution of different species. So you've got rat, cat, chimpanzee, and human, just looking at the different brain structures. All right, moving to the cerebral cortex, the neocortex, which is the outermost layer. You've got 4 lobes in the brain. You've got your frontal lobe, your parietal lobe, your occipital lobe, and your temporal lobe. Your occipital lobe is for vision. That's what it's responsible for. Your temporal lobe is for hearing, language processing, and memory. Your frontal lobe is responsible for intelligence, personality, voluntary muscles, and planning. And then your parietal lobe is for spatial location, attention, and motor control. Isn't it interesting how those 4 lobes of the brain are responsible for everything basically from head to toe? So, fun little fact, they used to say that the frontal lobe obviously is responsible for your decision making. And if you've heard that kind of excuse, well, you make these decisions because your brain hasn't fully developed. It develops between, by the age of 25. Well, for your second part of extra credit, let me know that the frontal lobe now develops between the average age now, is between the ages of 27 and 32. So now studies are showing that the frontal lobe is developing by between the ages of 27 and 32. And the reason that is because our brain is evolving. It used to be that we had to wait for things, right? We had to wait for phone calls, we had to wait for mail. And now our brains are molecularly, structurally, they're changing because we get information so quick now. And because it's so quick, our brain is not forming as quickly as it used to. So again, fun fact and extra credit point number 2 is the brain now fully develops between the ages of 27 and 32. All right, this is the somatosensory cortex and motor cortex. Again, another picture for you to look at. All right, so the somatosensory cortex in your parietal lobe, that is for body sensations and touch. The motor cortex is in the frontal lobe, and those again are for your voluntary movements. The association area is 75% of the cortex. All right, not sensory or motor, but responsible for integration of information and for executive functions. All right, if you want to click on a really good video, I put a good video in here, click on here. It is just a very short explanation of Broca's area and Wernicke's area. And again, pronounced V because it is German. Both of these are based on 2 people due to an issue that happened. So Broca's area is linked to speech production and Wernicke's area is linked to comprehension of written and spoken language. So again, this little video will give you a snapshot of, the background of both areas. All right, split brain research. I feel like I have a split brain right now. All right, this is the corpus callosum. And again, you can see this is the brain, this is the split here. This is the large bundle of axons that connects the 2 hemispheres together. So the right works for the left and the left works for the right. And if you want to click on this link here, this is a video case discussed of patient WJ. It's a very interesting case in psychology and it's talked all through psychological realms. All right, again, like I said before, the left is responsible for the right and the right is responsible for the left. So again, another good picture to kind of depict what's responsible for what. All right, the hemispheres of the cortex. So you have hemispheric specialization of function. So the left hemisphere, what that's responsible for is verbal processing, speech, grammar. And the right is responsible for nonverbal information, spatial perception, visual recognition, and emotions. All right, let's move on to the endocrine system. Isn't this amazing? All the systems in this body. All right, so they are a set of glands. This is where the pituitary gland is, the thyroid, the parathyroid, the pancreas, adrenal, ovaries, and testes that regulate the body by secreting hormones into the bloodstream. And they send chemical messages that are relatively slow, and it's a relatively slow communication system that are interconnected with the nervous system, especially the autonomic nervous system. So again, you can stop, pause, and look at that. All right, so the adrenal glands, that is responsible for mood, energy, coping with stress. Again, as you can see, you've heard stress mentioned a few times. So that is within our whole body. There's so many different systems that are responsible for stress and stress responses. All right, your adrenal glands have that epinephrine and norepinephrine. When we look at the pancreas, that is responsible for digestive and endocrine functions and hormones, including insulin. The ovaries and testes, ovaries for females, testes for males, those are hormones involved in sexual development and reproduction. Recovery from brain damage depends on, when we're looking at brain damage, plasticity and repair, age of the individual, extent of the damage, area of the brain affected, and characteristics of the person. Repairing the damaged brain, that can be done through collateral sprouting, substitution of function, and neurogenesis. Again, if you're interested in that, you can look at that more in the text. All right, if you suffer with a concussion or a mild traumatic brain injury, you probably have heard of a TBI before. That's head injury with temporary loss of brain function. You can, you can have what's called brain tissue implants through brain grafts and stem cells. So you see a lot of that in athletes, especially football and soccer. All right, kind of jumping through to genetics and behavior. So you've got your chromosomes, your genes, and your DNA. I'm going to skip through a lot of this stuff. If you want, you can kind of look at this. All right, looking at dominant recessive principle. If one gene of pair is dominant and one is recessive, the dominant gene overrides the recessive gene, as we know. So a recessive gene exerts its influence only if both genes of a pair are recessive, in the example of blue eye color. This just gives you kind of an example of this. I'm not covering that. And that is done. I kept this one under 30 minutes. I'm so proud of myself, because this is, for me personally, this is one of my least favorite chapters. It's probably the most important chapter, but again, it's kind of cut and dry, black and white, kind of to the point, but I do have students that absolutely love this chapter. So I'm very much like, please take an entire semester with an instructor that absolutely loves that, because then you're going to get like 4 months of learning about the brain and behavior. So hopefully that wasn't too painful for those of you that are like me that just want to get through it. And you have your couple areas of extra credit if you did watch this, and let me know in an email. All right, until chapter 3, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you are watching this, and I will see you next time. Take care of yourself and peace.